Hi, my name is Richard Osmond. I'm the president and CEO of Element 29 Resources. Our company is listed on the TSX Venture Exchange primarily, but we also have a listing on the OTCQB and we're listed on the Lima Stock Exchange. The company is very much copper focused, exploring primarily in Peru, looking for tier one assets in a world-class mining jurisdiction.
Richard, good to see you. I think we saw you about 10 months ago. So it's appreciate you coming back on. Tell us what you've been doing since then. Maybe give people a little bit of background on yourself again, because I'd like to say it's been a while. What are you by training?
Yeah, I'm a geoscientist, I guess, and I've primarily worked with major mining companies in the early part of my career, primarily had some really world-class nickel deposits, Boise Bay, Ragland, and I was involved in some of the early work with Anglo that, I would like to say helped lead to the discovery of Sakatti. I left before that mine was discovered, but so I've seen exploration from the very early stage all the way up to in mine. And some of these deposits are still going since the 90s, so just world class.
Right, and I guess we better be sort of clear about what's the opportunity in front of us. It's you're chasing copper and Peru, obviously, but what are we looking at today? And more probably, how have you kind of got to that point since we last spoke?
Yeah, so I resigned from Anglo in 2008, I think it was, and I started a private royalty generator called Globetrotters Resource Group. Globetrotter spent about 8 years exploring for copper in Peru. So I wanted to get out of nickel exploration, get into copper. I could see there was a copper crunch coming. Nickel always the same, where the price of nickel goes to a certain level and you see all these laterites become economic. So there's just like an infinite supply of nickel coming in. You don't see that in copper. Copper is completely different. Very little substitution and very hard to find. All the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, have been sort of taken. So now you're having to look deeper and in more higher risk jurisdictions, I guess. So we had built about 8 years, and then eventually we put Element 29 together in 2018, and we listed the company in late 2020. As part of that, we had made a discovery called Elida, which we put about 14,000 meters into drilling that project, and we put out a resource estimate in 2022. It's just really a starting point on very little drilling, but it sort of showed the amount of the ability of our team to go out and make these kind of grassroots discoveries.
Right. Okay. So that's what we're chasing. I kind of would like to kind of maybe get a little bit technical today. Kind of dive into certain aspects of the business model, starting with the kind of geology and the kind of, I guess, resource expansion. You've done an MT survey, which kind of helps you identify these kind of, well, multiple actually low resistivity anomalies below the kind of current pit shell. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you've learned?
Yeah, so MT has become a fairly popular tool in certainly in the South America for exploring for these large porphyry copper deposits at depth. That system can target down to like over a kilometer, and it was used very well. I think if you look at the Aldebaran Altar news release that was put out over the summer, where they had actually doubled their resources by using or targeting the MT data, for their deeper mineralization, which was higher grade even. So we felt that we could do something similar to Elida. I think there's a preconceived idea or notion that Elida was roughly a 300 million ton deposit, but we just wanted to show that this is a wide open system. It's in a belt, and we were able to sort of map out what we think is the hydrothermal alteration footprint of the system. It's like over 6 kilometers in strike length, and within that we had some really interesting targets that we're currently trying to follow up.
There's some known kind of mineralization zones in there. Are there any kind of specific features there that kind of suggest a kind of bornite rich core that you could go chasing after? And I'm thinking specifically towards that kind of fantastic hole I saw, like over 1,000 meters at 0.54% copper equivalent. What's the data set they've been using to kind of be able to target and hone in on things like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Within that hole, that hole was designed to really try and map out the sort of the zonation of the system. We had been getting some pretty decent copper mineralization inside the pit, but we're looking to also expand outside of that pit. We just felt that there, is potential, certainly with the strip ratio that we have, which is about 0.74 to 1, to be able to significantly expand that resource shell and expand the pit. And part of that was to drill some holes extending from within inside the pit to infill, and then continue the holes outside to look for better mineral or more mineralization. And of course, when you go deeper, you have to have higher grades. So what we're actually seeing in the hole was a zonation where you're seeing a lot more chalcopyrite or more pyrite to chalcopyrite, so a ratio of about 4 to 1 pyrite to chalcopyrite. But as you get deeper in the hole, that ratio started to move into like a 1 to 1, and that's really interesting. And what it sort of suggests is that you're getting less pyrite, therefore less sulfur. You're changing the sulfidation state of the system, and therefore you should expect to start to see higher grade copper mineralization coming in as you go deeper. So we're trying to test that now, which is pretty exciting, and it sort of tells us we haven't even gotten into the best part of the system yet.
So okay, that's interesting. So like targeting that higher grade core. In terms of that targeting, you're just about to kind of get into this kind of drill program. Have you been integrating any of the kind of 3D geophysics with any kind of geological mapping or geochem?
Yeah, so as part of that, we know that most of the low resistivity anomalies that we picked up are really mapping out sort of the contact between the porphyry intrusive complex and the host sediments. So, you're sort of mapping out that halo. But as we go deeper, deeper down at about close to 1.5 kilometers, we're getting into what looks like a really strong low resistivity anomaly. And it correlates very well with where we expect to see the high grade copper core. So we're pretty excited about getting in and testing that and showing. I mean, we don't want to be drilling 1.5 kilometer holes all the time because we're still getting mineralization on surface. But if we can sort of prove that the system is actually getting stronger and better at depth, it certainly allows you to see the ability to put together a pretty sizable deposit just in the zone 1 area alone.
I know, but they're kind of, I guess, lies the challenge as well. You kind of got a like 2.5 or 2.5 kilometer alteration system, most of which is untested. So again, how do you go about prioritizing? Because you don't, like I say, you don't want to be going deep holes that are deep and expensive, but you need to sort of give the market something to get excited about at the same time as well. So what's priority for you?
Well, we're trying to expand the resources outside of the pit that's there. So we're looking to without taking too large of a step at risk. You don't want to be going 3 kilometers away from where we're currently drilling when we're actually finding ore already outside of that pit, and contiguous with the existing mineralization. So we want to basically show that the pit that's there is not constraining the entire resource, and we can certainly build that pit out quite a bit more to be able to take in more of that resource to a point where obviously it becomes uneconomic to have a larger strip ratio than what you can manage for a deposit like this. But I don't think if you look at most large copper deposits, the pits themselves are generally less than 1 billion tons, and then the rest of the resources sort of sit underground or deeper parts of the system. So very hard to take a pit down more than 600-700 meters depth, unless you're dealing with something like I don't know, like a Grasberg or something significantly larger.
So in terms of how you, because I'm sort of intrigued by how you kind of, well, how you get after this, and more importantly, kind of come back to the market with things that they want to hear. So risk management is part of that. But so in terms of, have you observed so far any kind of telescoping effects or sort of late stage overprints in terms of with the high sulfidation?
No, I mean that's certainly, well, we have seen multiple phases of stages or phases of mineralization. We have a more of a obviously porphyry related mineralization coming in as part of the porphyry system, where most of the copper is associated with, like, varying from EDM veins all the way to A veins and then B veins and C veins kind of thing. But we also see a late overprint, more of a retrograde response, which sometimes is called like E veins. Other people call it intermediate sulfidation veins, and it's essentially it's a late stage overprint that also brings in mineralization. This is actually, proving to be quite interesting. It's primarily associated with chlorite epidote, depending on the host rock, and then, you know, pyrite, chalcopyrite, pyrrhotite, and magnetite. And yeah, definitely a lower temperature regime, and you can actually see it in places where it's replacing like anhydrite in the rock and things like that. So
Right. Okay.
um, but it is definitely upgrading the system, and where we get more of that, the grades tend to be higher. Generally speaking, that sort of occurs in the upper part of the system, but we're actually seeing that all the way down like a kilometer plus deep. So we
Okay.
don't really fully understand why it isn't sort of why it's sort of sitting that deep in the system yet.
But you're starting to, I guess it's helping you start to kind of vector in and trace these kind of high grade zones across this kind of complex intrusive that you're looking at. So not all bad, but a puzzle that needs solving, right?
It is, yeah. It's actually very very interesting. We're starting to understand the system more as we continue to drill. I mean, as far as we see it, the system is just wide open, in all directions for the most part. So, and the fact that we're getting higher grade mineralization as we go deeper, I mean, you need that, right? If you're going to go underground, you need your cutoff grade is going to be higher. So, it sort of puts us in a position where we still have lots of targets left to drill, even around zone one, even before we continue to drill outside of that.
Okay. So, but you're starting to pick up on these kind of structural controls, presumably. And what are they if you are?
Well, I mean, I think really we're sort of tracking sort of the porphyry intrusive complex. That's made up of porphyry early. Well, I mean, I guess we haven't really seen the early mineral porphyry event yet. That's still a bit of an enigma. But the system itself, is obviously porphyry related. We have lots of early potassic alteration with A veining and B veining and things like that. We're seeing fragments of what look like early mineral porphyry as maybe it's part of breccias where we're seeing like fragments that have like EDM veins and things like that, which we think are the early mineral porphyries. They tend to be a little bit more mafic, a lot more biotite associated with it, and stringer and disseminated calco. So that's really what we're trying to find is the source of that copper, and which is generally we think is the early mineral porphyry. But at the same time, all these overprints and different phases of mineralization are all adding copper to the system, so the actual porphyry intrusive complex itself outcrops on surface as a late mineral porphyry dike called or porphyry stock called a QMP, and then it's also mineralized, but the grades are a little bit lower. But when the copper grades start to get lower, the moly credits sort of kick in. So generally speaking, if you look at it from a copper equivalent grade from some of the intercepts that we've had, they say very consistent because of that sort of variation in copper to moly in the system.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. And what do we say in terms of number one priority for you? Is obviously get drilling, but the point of that drilling, the type of that drilling is what's going to grow to what 500 million tons plus. Is that the goal?
Yeah, I think so. I think we'd like to get that pit out to at least a 500 million tons. I mean, that's sort of a bit of a magic number. That gives you roughly 15 years life of mine at about 100,000 tons a day production kind of thing, right? And
Right.
I think that's what you need to get a company interested in a project like Elida. I mean, we're very much explorers. We don't have the expertise to be mining these types of deposits, so we're trying to build Elida into a low hanging fruit in a world class jurisdiction, and show potential that within that pit to be at least a 500 million, with potential to expand the resources around it to 1 billion or
Right.
more.
Okay. Because if you're looking at obviously copper, moly, and silver, right? So how do you kind of stay in control of what you're going to be pulling out of the ground? Because you'd either need to believe moly could stand on its own as a concentrate, or it's just going to be part of a byproduct credit. Are you able to kind of currently understand what you should be chasing, where you should be going with the kind of production deliverable in mind. I'm trying. I think someone described it to me as like commercial drilling.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, this is a copper deposit with moly and silver credits. Obviously, the most value is in the copper, but copper's over $5, per pound in comics today, yesterday, and today. So doing very well, and I think uh, the resources that we put together were based on very little drilling, around 14,000. I think you need at least more than double that to really have a good understanding of what you have there. So we're constantly infilling to increase the confidence in the near surface mineralization to get the grades up, and at the same time, by extending the holes outside where we know we have a good feeling that we're going to get some pretty decent grade mineralization as well. We're allowing the holes to continue. We just want to understand the system, and try and get a feel for, how big the system can be, what the grades are going to look like, and things like that, right?
Right. Okay. And I'll get on to drilling questions in a second here, but just finishing off in that area with regards to, I guess, metallurgy, etc. Have you done much at the moment in terms of trying to understand what you've got at surface versus deeper, recoverables and payables?
Well, we haven't done any wet work yet. We're planning to do some. Reason being is, I mean, I know companies get into doing met work at a fairly early stage, but quite honestly, I mean, met work is really designed to be done when you're very close to getting to the operational stage, where you're trying to understand your ore types and how they fit into the mine plan and things like that. And I don't think we're anywhere near that, but I think it does provide us the ability to understand what the copper recoveries are and the moly and silver recoveries are, which are important as well. So we will probably do some preliminary network just to try and understand that for some of the key ore types. The types of mineralization really aren't changing a whole lot in the sense that we're not seeing a big transition from chalcopyrite rich ore to like anergite rich ore or anything like that. So it's not like you're going from porphyry laden mineralization to high sulfidation mineralization. We don't really see any anergite in the system. We're just too deeply eroded. And quite honestly, I mean, even the intermediate sulfidation mineralization that we're seeing was a bit of a surprise, with a good surprise at that. And, good to see the more copper being added that way. But, you know, but also when we don't have a lot of gold in the system, we probably don't see very much at all. But at the same time, because we're not dealing with minerals like energite, we don't have any arsenic in the system either. So, which is a good thing. I think we'll produce, and that's part of the met work as well. We'll be able to sort of prove that, we're not recovering a lot of deleterious metals, the concentrates. So, but, we don't expect any big surprises. Very little in the way of enrichment in the system. That's been mostly eroded away as well. We are seeing a couple areas where there's some structures that carry some enrichment, but they're pretty localized, so far
Okay.
anyway. Yeah,
Okay, so fairly clean concentrate,
clean,
expected,
pretty simple. Yeah.
and pretty simple, even better. Just maybe just get into the weeds a little bit with the drilling. You've outlined, some of the areas that you can go to outside of Elida. But have you got a sense of this where in terms of meters or dollars? Because I think you raised some money back in beginning of August or middle of August to kind of get after a 7,000 meter program. Can you tell us a little bit about allocation of capital?
Yeah, so I mean, our cost per drilling rate has historically been about between 450 and $500 US a meter. And with the 7,000 meter program, we're looking at around 3.5 million US to complete that. So just over between 4 and 5 million Canadian. So we currently have close to $10 million in the bank. We raised about 6.3 million, netted around 6.1, and then we had about 18 million warrants at 25 cents come due in September as well, which added another $4 million to our till. So that gave us a $10 million budget for the next 6 to 10 months, I guess, of drilling.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
As we continue to explore, we'll drill till Christmas. And we'll likely bring in a third rig soon just to keep things moving along. Um, the drilling at Elida is not overly quick. I think we average around 25 meters a day. Part of the reason for that is we don't have a water table there. So we're like drilling 1,000-meter holes and we're getting very little water recovery, which is not great for drilling, but it's fantastic for mining, you know. Again, another box that you can check to say, you know, very little environmental liability associated with acid mine drainage and things like that. So, you know, so those kind of things do make it a little bit more challenging for drilling, but as long as we have access to a lot of water, but we had to pump a lot of water to keep the drill turning.
Right. Okay. In terms of those other kind of risk management components or de-risking on the ground, you know, you're obviously going to sequence a whole kind of drill campaign there. What are the things that you've got to do between now and then, and obviously during that drilling program?
From a de-risking perspective,
Yeah, yeah. Just I guess operating in Peru, what you know, what are you looking out for?
yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big things that we've done, and we're really keen on getting this done, was try and get as many drill permits in place as we can prior to the election cycle, which is starting again next year. You know, I always tell people you hear a lot of white noise around the elections, where you start to see demonstrations and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you have the support from the community, you can operate, and the government will give you a license to operate. And we already have a 5-year access agreement in place with the community at Elida, and we're in the process of upgrading our drill permit from an FTA, which is 20 platforms, to 40, and we're hoping to have that done before the end of the year. So we want to have all of our permitting out of the way before the election cycle starts, so we can just continue to drill and not be sort of affected or impacted by that. Mining is just a huge part of the Peruvian economy. It's very difficult for, you know, I mean, there's always grumblings around nationalizing resources and things like that, but it just makes it too difficult. I mean, the economy related to mining is just too big. It can't be done. And if they try and do that, they'll probably put themselves into a depression. So, you know, I mean, Peru itself, there's only 2 countries in Peru that have, or in South America, that have the kind of agreements in place to sort of allow for, you know, I guess infrastructure for business to happen and for foreign investment to move into Peru. And that's a free trade agreement between Canada and Peru, which allows for, you know, no double taxation. Money flows freely between countries. And it's also the same with the US and Peru and China and Peru. Um, and the only other country that has that I think, is Chile. And then they also have what's called a bilateral investment treaty, or a BIT. And BITs are also important when it comes to developing these multi-billion-dollar deposits, right? What that does is it gives stability from an investment perspective. So if the government decides to take your asset away from you, you can take them to international arbitration court. That may not sound like a big deal, sounds like a long-term thing, but in actual fact, you know, Peru and Chile are the only 2 countries in South America to have that. And they didn't have it, and the government decided to take your project away from you, then it would just get tried in local courts, and the likelihood of winning is almost zero. Whereas if you have these agreements in place, and the government decide to do that, then you can actually take them to international arbitration. And if you win that, if you've done everything properly, got the right permits in place, the government, you know, allowed the project to be developed, and then they took it away, you can start seizing assets belong to the country outside of Peru. You know, so, and you become a bit of a pariah on the world stage. So because of that, you know, by having these stability agreements in place, it certainly makes for a better environment for developing these types of large scale systems. And you know, that's very key, and it makes Peru, you know, most companies that are interested in developing and operating mines are actively exploring in Peru, or, you know, trying to develop mines there. Eventually, mines get permitted, and so again, it's only Peru and Chile that have these types of agreements in place. And I think that's important from our perspective, and part of the reason why from a risk perspective, why we're there. If we're going to be exploring for these large systems that require significant capex to develop, we want to be in a jurisdiction where we know that these schemes can actually get built right and acquired.
Interesting. No, that's really interesting. That's really interesting, actually. I just want to sort of kind of hone in on the things that I guess investors will want answers to. Is having sort of looked around some of these new business models being formed, we're seeing a lot of money kind of piling into precious metals and even copper projects. Lots of generalist investors and also quite frankly rather esoteric capital coming in. They are expecting miracles in the sense of wanting companies to get into production quicker. As we know, from discovery to production, it's actually taking longer. How do companies like you sort of have to adapt to that environment? And can companies like you maybe look to kind of shorter paths to revenue by kind of skipping a few phases? I think that's just a blunt phrase. Is there a kind of path to production off the back of a PEA or a pre-feasibility study for a project like yours?
That's a really tough question. Peru has historically been a bit slow in getting permits, but if you do have, as I mentioned, community support, eventually you do get the permits. What is interesting though is, they just lost their title as being the second largest copper producer in the world last year to the DRC, and I think that started to wake up the government. They had been really slow in permitting exploration projects, and they're starting to realize at least that they don't have a pipeline of projects available. All the money that should be going into exploration has been moving into other countries like Argentina, Ecuador, that are actually trying to promote their mining sector. As a result of that, I think they're waking up and they've been starting to find ways to expedite permitting. And they've come to us and they've sort of said things like, what do we need to do to help you get your permits in place faster? And they recognize Elida as being one of these pipeline projects. So it's pretty exciting and important for us.
It is. It is, and that's very nice to hear. Actually, it's very encouraging. If I look back, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago in Peru, it was a place which was, I guess, it was uncertain times, and then post elections it seemed to brighten up somewhat. And I think what you're saying is perhaps they are a bit more global, outward looking. It's interesting, very interesting. Well, look, Richard, I mean, what would you like to leave us with in terms of your comments to investors looking at a project like yours at this point in time? What should people be valuing?
Well, I think we're like I said. I mean, trying to get to that 500 million ton resource level is a bit of a milestone for us. So we'd like to see that happen. So we're going to finish this drill program. We'll be drilling up until the end of the year for sure, and likely into 2026. We have the funds to do that. We'll as long as we're finding ore, we'll continue to do that. At the same time, we're preparing for a bit of a volatile year for 2026. So we're making sure all of our permits are in place for our key projects like Elida as well as Florida Cobre and Paca, and sort of go from there. So we're hoping to have enough drilling done at Elida at least to look at potentially putting out an upgraded resource estimate next year, which would be fantastic. And I think that'll be a catalyst for us. That'll show that, we've been able to potentially significantly expand our resource base and also, with inside of the pit, and then also show potential to, with some of the deeper drilling as well, to be able to show that we can build out an even larger resource going underground as well. Very few projects in the world have that ability these days. All the low-hanging fruit are pretty much done. Very hard to find open pittable resources that have potential to go underground to continue to mine once the open pit is depleted. And that open pit really brings in the capital that's needed to develop that underground infrastructure. Putting in these large block cave operations, like something like in the high Andes, at least, 500 meters underground. It takes a long time to build that before you get any copper out of the ground. You got to go in and do the ground prep. You're looking at least 5 to 10 years of development work before you're starting to pull copper out of the ground. Elida, you're essentially scraping 20 meters of dirt off the ground, and then you're putting like 0.5% copper into the mill. Makes a huge difference to your economic model, and you have the ability to do that and get payback almost fairly quickly. So very excited, and like I said, very rare to find projects like this that are still available, and we're going to continue to de-risk and show that we can build this out to something significant.
Richard, appreciate your time. Stay in touch. Exciting year ahead of you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it.